yet another important aspect of the middle game, how you're dealing with the middle pawn. So I'll try to exemplify this one as clearly as I can for our intermediate friends towards advanced chess students. Okay, what is an isolated pawn? Let's have a look at the current position, guys. An isolated pawn, namely this guy here on d4, from white's point of view, there is no other white pawn to sustain them, to defend them against black pieces' attack. There is nothing on the c, there is nothing on the e. So practically white will have to keep pieces in order to protect the pawn, okay, which you will aim to attack. Now, the idea is if it ever happens for you, for instance, to having an isolated pawn, the way out is to try to push the pawn and exchange it so you get rid of the weakness, or you try to create a lot of counter play. Now, in this position, assuming you're having the blacks and you're playing against the isolated pawn, because that's the theme of today's lesson, white would love to pushing the pawn and just simply trade them off. Now you've got to stop this, okay? You've got to stop this. So in our position now, we're fortunate enough to actually do have something very much available, and that is a very nice move, knight from c6 to b4. What does that do exactly? That does a couple of things. First thing first, it assures that white will not pushing the pawn down because you're simply having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 supporters for this particular d5. You control the square in front of the isolated pawn in this position here. And there is some other details at work. You keep a pressure on this bishop, which is a very active attacking bishop. And you also reveal the bishop's diagonal that hits on f3, threatening to give white, for instance, double pawns if they don't do something about it. So we've established they can't really push the pawn because you're going to come up with material. So let's assume if they play bishop b3, avoiding to trading the bishop. Okay, you're going to go now with the plan, which is bishop takes on f3, and now white has to take back. What did you achieve here? Well, you've generated an isolated pawn island here. That's a pawn island. It's an isolated guy. Double pawns on f-file, easily attackable. And the fourth perennial weakness, that was the d4 white pawn. So these are, I've highlighted on a board for you guys to see and understand, these are the weaknesses on which you will be focusing when you attack. Okay, so from a pawn structure point of view, white is doing worse here and black is doing better because black enjoys two pawn islands and they're all connected, so nice and ideally connected, whereas the white pawns I've highlighted, they are really all weaknesses. Okay, so that's not a carte blanche. Now you're going to win, absolutely guarantee. But definitely you got stronger attacking power and more weaknesses for your opponent. Okay, so now you retreated this guy, you keep an eye on this guy here. Whatever they trade, you're going to be taking back with the knight, and really that guy is an excellent outpost. So let's move now to another exercise. Okay, well, in this position here, we also discussed that when you play against the isolated pawn, ideal is for you to diminish your opponent attacking opportunities, trading their pieces. Don't be shy to trade off the queens, or more importantly, to trade off the opposite color bishop to the isolated pawn. Now, there is no bishop on the board, but definitely there is a queen, and definitely you could go for trading off that queen with a move like queen to f4. Okay, and if they take your rook, well, of course, you take it back. When the queen takes, knight takes, hitting the rook. So rook has to go. They can't go on the c because you already got a black rook there. So they go behind the pawn, so to speak, trying to moving to safety. But now you have an incredibly active black rook. So you go very nicely on c1. You check the king. The king will have to move. And look at the pieces activity again and again. Pieces activity in chess is the most important principle. Whatever is on a board, it's great, but if that piece particularly is not developed, it doesn't attack anything, it's not being used, it doesn't exist in practical terms. And now pieces activity for black is superior here. So you should be doing better than your opponent and going towards to winning, obviously. Now, let's have a look at this position here, guys. There is an isolated pawn. And also there is a opposite color bishop to the isolated pawn. Now, why do we say we need to try to trade off the bishop, which is the opposite color of the isolated pawn? Because the bishop on e3 is already stuck and passive. whereas the bishop on d3 is very active. So we need to trade off that guy or the queens. If the queens are not possible very much now, I mean, I don't think I want to do queen to f6, really. I mean, I don't want to have double pawns after queen takes me, just clearing this out. But I can definitely force, on my terms, trading off the bishop here with a move like bishop to c4. Okay, they can't say they ignore it or they don't care. That guy will be traded. Okay, I'll take it. They either take me or I'll take them. There's no way about it. So you diminish your opponent play, counterplay with this kind of move, and queen takes back, and absolutely fine. You're doing a little bit better than white here. This guy is isolated. That's awesome. And you've got some outposts. You got the knight that's coming here. They got a weakness here. Let's just identify them. Weakness here, isolated pawn here. You've got an outpost. I mean, what's not to love about this position? It's absolutely great. So let's go for another exercise here. Can you generate for black an isolated pawn? Surely you can. If you look at a position, you understand now by taking on c5. Obviously, queen can't take because rook is going to take back. So they have to take with the pawn. And when they take with the pawn, they've got an isolated pawn. It's heavily attackable. Heavily attackable. Okay, so you're already doing better in the position we discussed, my friends. So let's have a look here. How do you do an isolated pawn to your opponent, which, by the way, the isolated pawn in the center is weaker considered because easily attackable by pieces than the ones on the flank, let's say. Well, why don't we just take here? Obviously, if they take with the pawn, they already got themselves an isolated pawn. And if they take with the rook, we're going to take back and they will still have isolated pawn no matter what they try to. So obviously, when they take, there is already an isolated pawn, very targetable by your pieces. Let's move now for the next exercise. Isolated pawn, passive bishop on e6. Can I find a way maybe to get rid of this very active bishop? Of course there is a way. Of course there is a way. Something like bishop to d4. Notice that the bishop couldn't have moved. All right, couldn't have moved because the bishop would take the black queen. So now they sort of had to take, and when they take, we do take back, my friends, with knight, b3 takes to d4, passive bishop, black square, passive bishop, isolated pawn, amazingly positioned white knight, ideal outpost. It can't be challenged by any black pawn. Notice, please, that is very important. And the poor black bishop, they will never be able to attack your knight. So this knight is actually the hero of the day. That knight is the nightmare, okay, for your opponent, so to speak, because it can't be challenged. You can leave them there forever. All right, and you've got a nice pawn structure here. The bishop cannot attend to attacking them. You can attack them. I mean, there's so many ideas. I very much love this kind of ideas and looking already for so many weaknesses. Okay, let's move towards another exercise here. Right, what have we got here? Well, our opponent has already an isolated pawn on d5. And if you guys remember, when they have an isolated pawn, try to diminish their complexities and the attacking prowess of your opponent by trading off the pieces. So you simplify and keep your eyes clean and neatly towards that isolated pawn. Now you take the black queen. Don't be shy. Just take the queen. They already got it isolated. Of course, they'll be taking, but then you have another knight that stays so well positioned on an ideal outpost. And this bishop is just so passive. Of course, they might be trying to do things like that, attacking you here, but why don't you just move the rook on the c file? And you're doing great. You're doing absolutely awesome. In this position here, my friends, what do you think black should be playing? We already have an isolated pawn here. All right, so I guess they would like to push it and trade it. Okay, I can't trade the queens. I can't force the trade of the bishop, but maybe I can stop them from pushing the pawn, so to speak. I definitely can do that. And what does this bishop on d7 do? Well, not a great deal at the minute, but they could do a tremendous deal if repositioned and readjusted. And yes, you got it right. Bishop to c6. Look at this terrifying diagonal. It's just glorious. All right. And you already have 1, 2, 3, and 4, whereas they have as supporters for the d5 advancement 1, 2, and 3. So you're superior. You're controlling the pawn, the square in front of the isolated pawn. It can't be pushed. It's just phenomenal. It's very good. It's amazing. They've got an isolated pawn. You stop from them. You're stopping them from pushing. So you're enjoying a better position than your opponent. Okay. So guys, that's the concept. Have another look at the video, understand the concept. If you ever have an isolated pawn, try to push it and exchange it. So just as a general rule, keep this in mind. It might be exceptions, but generally that is applicable indeed. When you play against the isolated pawn, prevent them from pushing down so that it stays as a weakness until you eventually capture it. Trade off the queens in order of the hierarchy for exchanging. Trade off the queens. If queens can't be exchanged, trade off the opposite color bishop of the isolated pawn, or just trade off any piece, because just trade them off, because you're reducing the counter game for your opponent, and that guy really stays as a weakness until you eventually get to capture it. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. See you on my live streams, and we can be discussing more chess topics. Thank you very, very much.